It all starts here. They already said it in Madagascar. As the dawn rose and the earth churned and light began to caress the planet and follow it across the continents. They said it in Russia. There were people in Ukraine who said it. They said it throughout Europe. Believe it or not, they were saying it in Haiti. And now we're saying it on the east coast of America. The poor have said it. The rich have said it. The oppressed have said it. The free have said it. People who have met outside in the open have said it. People who met in humble buildings have said it. People in cathedrals have said it. And by the thousands in stadiums, they all said it. He's risen. He's risen. He's risen. All right, I know it's a New England church. Calm down. And if you're visiting us this morning, the last thing we want to do is freak you out. Right? It's like, oh, it's one of those churches. They go like this in public. Can you believe it? But listen, we got to be honest. This is our March Madness, right? I mean, come on. All month long, if your alma mater or that team you picked to be at the top of the bracket, you wanted that 1 in a trillion moment, and you don't believe in the resurrection, but you believed in that 1 in a trillion moment, that your team is going to get to the top of the bracket, and something extraordinary and unexpected happens, what do? Yeah! Right? You're not afraid to do that. You're doing that in your office. You're doing that at home. You're doing it in a bar. A bunch of guys who normally get together and talk like this over a cup of coffee, and I go, no! That's your March Madness. And I get it, because something unexpected and extraordinary happened. But for Christians, by the billion across this planet, when we think of Easter, we really believe that something unexpected and extraordinary happened. So yes, we cheer, just like you do. All right? Because we honestly believe that it all starts here. If it weren't for the resurrection, there would be no Christian movement. We believe that. So this morning, I want to tell a really unlikely story. Okay? And then I want to maybe suggest that we have a tomb that we've been living in. It's dark in that tomb, and it feels despairing, and it might feel hopeless to you. But this morning, I'm hoping that Christ will call you out of that tomb, because I believe that the power that pulled Jesus from the tomb is available to you today. And that's what we want to talk about. Lord, I just thank you that this moment is your moment. This is the birth, Lord, of your church, of your people. And God, I pray this morning that when you speak, it wouldn't be with my voice, but it'd be with your power. I pray that you go past mind and past heart and into soul, and you breathe life into people today. Father, I love you. I really want this moment to be about Jesus and what he has come to give us. And may there be people today who receive that gift. I love you, Lord. Amen. So this is just one of the accounts. There's 4 of them. And they're called Gospels, written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we've been looking at Matthew for a long time. So we're finishing up with Matthew by looking at this. As evening approached, they're talking about now on Friday, what Christians have come to call Good Friday, the day that Jesus was crucified, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Christ. So he's following the teachings of Jesus, trying to live the life that Jesus describes. Going to Pilate, who was the governor that ordered the execution, he asked for his body. Pilate ordered that it be given to him, and Joseph took the body. In other words, he took it off the cross with the help of other people, wrapped it in clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he cut out of the rock. And he rolled a great stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. First century tombs often looked like this. It was a Mediterranean culture. They didn't bury the bodies in the ground like what we do. They put them in tombs. So in a tomb, something like this, a brand new one, which meant nobody had ever used this tomb. Only one body goes into this tomb. And that's the body of Jesus. They would take that body from the cross. They would try to do it before sunset. It was really important to the Jews because sunset indicated Sabbath, and you weren't supposed to touch a dead body. You weren't supposed to do anything with the dead on the Sabbath. They would have hurried to get him into this tomb. They would have cleaned his body off. They would have wrapped it in strips of linen tight. They would have packed about 75 pounds of spices into it, because as the body begins to decay in a Mediterranean environment, it gives off a really bad aroma. So they try to disguise that aroma with the spices. And then they would have laid him on a long cloth. The cloth would have been so long that it would have gone underneath them and wrapped over the top of them. And as they walked out, Joseph would have gone over, there probably would have been a chalk or something at the bottom of that big round stone. Would have pulled it out. It was on an incline, and it would have rolled into place. Thunderous sound. Easy to close a tomb. Really hard to open it. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, apparently there was a lot of Marys in Jesus' day, just saying, was sitting there opposite the tomb. What's important, just keep this in the back of your head. These two women followed the men all the way to the tomb, so they knew where the tomb was. It wasn't like, they get lost along the way and need GPS, which is a good thing because GPS didn't exist. The next day, so this is Saturday, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, the deceiver said, after 3 days I'll rise again. So the rumor had gotten out that Jesus had said, on the third day, I'm going to come back to life. They didn't believe it. So give the order to the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, the disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. The last deception will be worse than the first. So obviously the body is still in the tomb because they're asking to secure it. Take a guard, Pilate said. Go and make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and they made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting a guard. So back to the illustration. In other words, out in the open for everyone to see, there would have been a contingent of soldiers, armed soldiers outside protecting the tomb. That big rock that would roll over the entrance of the tomb, they would have taken a cord. They would have put in part of it on maybe the wall or the stone itself, put a wax seal on it, would have stretched the cord across, and would have put a wax seal onto the wall of the tomb. The wax seal would have had the impression, an insignia of an authority. Grave robbing was a serious crime in this day. Very serious crime. You did not rob from a grave without expecting to face authorities and perhaps end up in one. Okay? So let's lay that all out. Now, after the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, we're now talking about Sunday, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, remember earlier, they saw the tomb, they know where it was, went to look at the tomb. Now, here's where it feels kind of like an unlikely story, and I understand that. And actually, I think, and we'll talk about this why, I think Matthew's writing it down like, whew. Okay, there was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven. An angel? And going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the woman, let's just put a pin in the angel thing for a moment, okay? I understand some of us sitting here are like, angel, what? Okay, just put a pin in it, all right? Don't be afraid. You know what I love? The birth of Jesus and the rebirth of Jesus, there is an angel talking to a Mary, and the first thing that the angel says is, don't be afraid, right? It's a bookend to the life of Jesus. For I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He is risen, just as he said. And now the angel says something I really appreciate. Come and see the place where he lay. A lot of people think faith is the lack of evidence. Just take that step. You don't need to have all that. It's not. From the very beginning of the resurrection, it was very important that people see for themselves, that they gather concrete evidence. And so the angel invites the two Marys, go in there, see where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he is risen from the dead and he's going ahead of you into Galilee, and there you will see him. And now I've told you. Right? So that they collect the evidence. And the other great thing about this story that most Americans don't pick up on is that the very first ministers of the gospel, the good news of the resurrection of Jesus, were women. In a patriarchal society in the first century, women weren't even considered to be great witnesses in a court of law. Never mind to be ministers or priests in the religion. Just wasn't allowed. But from the beginning, the resurrection of Jesus, the seeds that would change our society were planted by an angel who told two women, you're going to be the first people to tell the world that Jesus Christ has come back from the dead. That's pretty cool, right? I'm just saying. You don't have to agree with me, but I think it's cool, right? So the woman hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy. You know what we call that? Worship. I don't know how many times you've had those, I don't know if you've ever had that experience. I've had this experience where there's been like this sense of holy awe. Makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And it's this mixture, right? You feel both joy and fear. A lot of people don't understand that, but that's a moment of holiness. And they ran to tell the disciples, and suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. And they came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. This is very important. They saw Jesus, they heard Jesus, they touched Jesus. In another story, when somebody was doubting that it was really Jesus, Jesus said, look at my hands, look at the scars. I would imagine that those scars are on his feet as well. And as the woman fell to his feet, they heard the voice that they recognized. They saw the wounds in his feet, and they knew, though they didn't understand how, that this is Jesus. And Jesus said, and hear it again, Jesus is commissioning these women, don't be afraid, go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. And the first words went out into the world that he is risen. While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city, reported to the chief priest everything that had happened. And then the chief priest went, oh, we were wrong. We did this. We couldn't believe we did this. We feel really bad. He was really the Son of God, and we should have worshiped him. We're going to go find him. No, they didn't. Because sometimes when you choose not to believe, nothing's going to convince you, even a resurrected body. Because when the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a lot of money, telling them, you are to say his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this report gets to the governor, we'll satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day, the whole thing. Because from the very beginning, when they first started to write things down, they focused on this day. They focused on this day because this day was the birth of a movement that started to push, and it pushed them. Eventually, it pushed them out of Israel. It pushed them into the ancient Mediterranean world. It pushed them into wider Europe. They went both east and west with Europe. It started to plant itself in all throughout Europe. It went into northern Africa, and it began to go south throughout Africa, began to go west. Eventually, it crossed an ocean, and it came to two other continents, and it planted itself. And the Christian story has moved around the world to today. And for a lot of people, we think, all right, earthquakes, angels, resurrected bodies. Yeah, okay, the first century world would believe that because they're not as scientific as us and they're a little bit more naive. They had all these mythologies. But I remember this quote, and this is a warning to us today. When we treat first century ears as gullible and superstitious, we present a cultural superiority that reveals our arrogance and prejudice. When our response to the resurrection is that those people were just naive, they were gullible, superstitious, we're saying more about ourselves than we're saying about them. What we are revealing is really an arrogant and prejudiced approach to the people of the first century. They might have believed in angels. Americans believe in angels. They didn't think there were angels around every corner necessarily. They knew and understood that a miracle was a miracle because it didn't happen very often. And so when they began to write down the account of Jesus, they were very purposeful on recording with accuracy and evidence what had happened because they understood no matter who was hearing the story, it would be considered unlikely. So it leaves us with the question, what happened to Jesus' body? You know, there was, for a while, people believed, oh, he just got better. You know, it happens. You think somebody's dead, they're really in a coma. You know, those odd stories where all of a sudden at a funeral, the person comes out of the casket. Ah! Right? So that rumor went around for a while. It's really not a reliable rumor, because if you understand the story of what had happened, Jesus has been physically beaten, probably has internal injuries. Jesus has been hit around the head with a heavy staff, most likely dealing with concussions. Jesus has been whipped in a violent way with something called a flogging. A flogging would have meant massive blood loss. Sometimes it was so effective it even meant exposure of organs. Right? He would have had a heavy crossbeam he would have to carry by himself up to a hill. And we know that he couldn't achieve the task, that he had such a hard time that they sent somebody to help him carry the beam. And when you're crucified, it's a slow, agonizing death of asphyxiation. But respecting the Jewish culture, they didn't want to leave a dead body up on the cross. It would take days typically for people to die of crucifixion. So they went around, the soldiers, they would check the bodies. Sometimes they would break the legs to force the person to just suffocate to death. But when they came to Jesus, they knew that he was dead. They even poked him with a spear, penetrated his chest, so that at that point now a lung has been popped. As they take the body off down, men would have looked at it carefully. They would have seen that it was dead as they cleaned it up. And then when they wrapped it up with all those wrappings I talked about and the spices, you would have died of asphyxiation. You would have suffocated from that point. It is clear from the story of Jesus that he was dead. I mean, what's he going to do? Unwrap himself, stumble across the tomb, and bang on the stone until somebody opens the door? That takes a lot of faith to believe in that. Some people say that his body was stolen. That rumor began at the very beginning. We read about it in the Gospels, and it still perpetuates to today. It's an interesting theory, but you have to consider what those events were like, because the Gospels are very honest. Like, the disciples ran. They were scared for their lives. They were afraid that what had happened to Jesus would happen to them, because the story of Jesus is the story of somebody who was expected of treason by a government that had no patience for treason. And that if the founder had been crucified, why wouldn't that have happened to all the followers? And so the idea that Jesus' body was stolen would mean they would have had to rally together, get enough people to overcome the soldiers, and would have had to break the seal to open the tomb, to make themselves viable to be arrested for grave robbing. And there was no way that they were going to do that quietly. You saw how big the stone was. It wasn't like move it, shh. Okay, go. Right? It's just not going to happen. That takes a lot of faith. But then many people just think it's a fictional story. It's a made-up, inspiring story, a myth like many myths that happened, which is an interesting theory. One of the things we've been doing is we've read, as we studied the book of Matthew, read it, studied it, preached it. Again, 40 years of walking with God and reading scriptures. What's very clear to me about the scriptures, one, is that they got some of the highest ethical statements of ancient literature. To this day, people who read the Sermon on the Mount, this little chapter section, these 3 chapters in the middle, or the very beginning of Matthew's gospel, call it some of the best ethical and theological writings of the day. We have people who aren't Christians who say that. And so we're to say that they had this high ethical standard that they put together in their gospels and then they lied about the core? Is that really likely? And then as you continue to read the Gospels, you read about they're very concerned about giving you physical evidence that you can understand to validate this theory that I believe they thought, who's going to believe this? And even if you think about the story itself, say that you're at the beginning stages of a new movement that was going to go around the world, right? And you got these leaders of this first church. Wouldn't you want to make them look really good? Right? I mean, if I were going to tell the story, you know what I would tell? The story I would tell is that Jesus went into this garden and he was distraught, and so his disciples surrounded him. We're with you. We're not going to leave you. They stayed awake with him. They prayed fervently for Jesus, encouraged him, got anything that he needed. And then when the soldiers showed up, they would have rallied to the cause around Jesus, and he would have said, put the swords away. And they would have struggled with that, but they would have understood because they were brilliant, right? That the teachings of Jesus had predicted this moment, and as hard as it was to watch their Savior go through this, they would have parted the ways, but they would have gone and followed Jesus right into the courtroom. And then all these disciples would have shouted out against the lies that were told. They would have tried to tell the truth and what their experience was like. It would have been almost convincing. but the leaders would have been able to turn the tide of injustice with enough money. But they would have followed Jesus right to Pilate. And as the crowd shouted, "Crucify him," they would have shouted louder, "He's the Son of God." And when Jesus stumbled to the cross, they would have run around Jesus and they would have helped him and lifted him and maybe carried him. And they would have taken that cross to the top. And they all would have sat there at the foot of Jesus, giving him comfort as he died. Then they would have escorted the body back to the tomb with Joseph, and they would sit there outside that tomb praying and waiting and holding vigil, and they would have said, "He's coming back to life. We know he's coming back to life. He kept telling you he's coming back to life. We're going to stay here for the third day." And when the soldiers come, they would have witnessed to the soldiers, and it would have made a great story that when the tomb broke open, they would have been, "Yeah!" Right? High-fiving it and hugging Jesus, and it would have been a great moment. That's the story I would tell. Because I would want you to have confidence in these leaders who are telling you an incredible story. But it's not the story of the Gospels. The story of the Gospels are people who just didn't get what Jesus was saying. Matter of fact, they tried to stop Jesus from going to the cross. And Jesus had to yell at them in order to get them out of the way so he could get to the cross. Then when it came time at the Last Supper, one of those disciples went out and actually betrayed Jesus. Another one stood bold and said he'd follow him to the end and then abandoned him before he even hit the cross. That 10 of them ran away in fear. They were hiding, grieving, scared, taking care of their own self-interest rather than being at the foot of Jesus. Only one followed Jesus to the cross. And none of them were there at the tomb on that Sunday morning. Why did 2 women become the first people to proclaim the risen Jesus? Because all the men were too afraid to go. There's an honesty and an integrity to the scriptures that I've been, for 40 years I've been doing this, and I go through every one of those and I revisit every one of those. I keep coming back. It is so unlikely, but I can't get past the point that Jesus came back to life. As unlikely as that sounds, but here's the thing. It only had to happen once. And I really believe it did. Now, we understand, and we're just like the angel. I like to think we're like an angel, right? We're like, go and figure it out for yourself. What we say is explore it. That's why we have a group called Starting Point, where you can go and you can ask any question that you want. No holds barred is fine. And to explore this for yourself. But here's the thing. That power that raised Jesus out of a grave began to touch the lives of other people and pull them out of their own graves. Because those men that were afraid, that were scared, that were ashamed, that were trapped in guilt, hiding out, going back to their businesses, or just trying to stay undercover and out of the way of authorities, those men eventually became bold proclaimers of the gospel. Those are the people who went into the middle of a crowded city where anybody could see them and started talking about Jesus, and 3,000 people came and birthed the church at their first sermon. They came out of their graves because Jesus called them. Just like the Apostle Paul, a great man, cities are named after him and, universities and stuff. He's this guy, he's trapped in a tomb of anger and violence, looking to kill people that call themselves Christians until Christ called him out of his grave of anger and fear and violence. And then Paul went throughout the ancient world. He left his family. He was abused, mistreated, beaten. He was flogged. He was kicked out of cities. He was arrested twice, set up on charges of injustice, and followed his faith all the way to the grave. As a matter of fact, every one of them, except for one, John, we'll keep Judas out of it, gave their lives choosing to be killed rather rescind the message. A famous man in the 1970s who was in part of Watergate, this guy Chuck Colson once said, listen, from personal experience, 1 or 2 people may be able to keep a secret, but not a group, right? And so Chuck Colson was pushing the idea, if they all died for what they believed in, there's got to be validity in that. But here's the thing. I think that same power is still at work today. And I say that because I know it. I know it from a teenager. I was trapped in my own tomb. It was a tomb of anger, bitterness, grief, and sorrow. I had seen 2 parents die, long, slow deaths. And alone, I cried out to God, shaking my fist in anger, and he called me out of the grave. I stumbled into a new light where I found life and purpose and love. He restored my family, gave my life meaning. I went back in that tomb when I was diagnosed with cancer. And suddenly fear and anger and sorrow overwhelmed me again, and I slipped back into the darkness of a tomb. But Christ called me out of that tomb. This time I didn't stumble out, I ran out, because he reminded me that the life that he had given me was not just a life for today, it was a life to take me beyond death. And even though I was standing at the verge of death, I didn't have to be afraid. If he came out of a tomb, I was going to come out of a grave. And that was okay. And then it just kept going on. I don't know what your tomb is. Your tomb may be fear, because you just turn on the news and you see war in the world. You see the collapse of nations. You see a society of mass shootings. You don't feel safe to go to the movies, to go to the restaurants, to go into public, to go dancing, to go to church. And so you're just swallowed up in fear, living in a dark tomb. Maybe it's anger. You just see a world that is angry, and that anger has saturated you. You've lost your patience, and like news reporters and politicians, you're just pouring that anger out to the people all around you, and you're just bound together in that anger. It could be confusion. You got everything you need in life, but you just don't feel satisfied. You're looking for more. You got big questions about God and life, and you don't know where to turn to find them. And so you're in a darkness of ignorance, crying out for help. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe you've been wrapped so tight with addiction to alcohol or to drugs or to pornography or to gambling. You're just bound up in it, and you feel like you're dying. You don't know who you are anymore. Maybe it's guilt and shame. Maybe so many things have happened to you in life that you're just so dying you can't even breathe of the guilt and the shame that you feel. So you're trapped in that darkness behind a stone covering of your life. Maybe it's death. Maybe you lost someone you love. Maybe you feel alone. Maybe you're drowning in sorrow. Maybe you got a prognosis like what I heard, and your death has become imminent, and you don't know where life is, and you're scared. Jesus Christ wants to open up the tomb of your life. And with a voice that has the power of resurrection in it, he wants to call you to life. He wants to bring you out of the grave. He wants to bring you into the light of a new day. He wants to give you purpose. He wants to give you love. He wants to give you peace. He wants to give you joy. He wants to give you hope. He wants to put you on a new path, because the power of the resurrection that pulled Jesus out of the grave wants to make your life, something unexpected and something extraordinary for the world to look at and to say, what has happened to you? And you can say, Jesus Christ has happened to me. Because the power that pulled Jesus from a tomb is available to you today. You know what we got to do? We got to sing about that. Let's go.